The day my mother passed away was the day silence became unbearable. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforted you after a long day. No, it was the heavy kind. The one that pressed down on your chest until breathing itself felt like betrayal. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, a mixture that would forever remind me of her. Family members moved through the rooms in slow, hushed steps, their voices low, as if even words were afraid to echo. But not Daniel. My brother stood tall, greeting everyone with a polite smile, his hand resting proudly on the shoulder of whoever came to shake it. He looked like the perfect son, the one everyone admired, the one who deserved all the praise. "A strong boy," one of our aunts whispered as she passed me. "He did so much for your mother." I bit my tongue. My jaw tightened. It wasn't true, not the way she thought. Daniel had been present, yes, but only when it suited him. He was always good at showing up in the spotlight, the charming son, the dutiful child. What people didn't see were the times he disappeared when things got too hard, leaving me to pick up the pieces. But people don't remember the one cleaning in the shadows. They remember the one standing in the front row, smiling. I sat near the window, staring out at the garden my mother once tended. The roses were wilting, petals falling into the soil like small tears. I remembered her voice, soft but firm. "Take care of the house, no matter what happens. It's our history." Those words rang in my mind now, almost mocking me as Daniel laughed quietly with a cousin across the room. Every time someone came to give condolences, they went to him first. "Daniel, your mother was proud of you," one neighbor said. Daniel lowered his head just enough to look humble, but his lips curled into a smile he couldn't hide. I hated that smile. I wanted to shout, to tell them all the truth, that he wasn't the saint they thought he was. But grief held me back. My throat was dry, and every attempt at words died before leaving my mouth. Instead, I just listened to their whispers. "He'll take care of the estate. He was always the responsible one. He deserves it all." Each phrase cut deeper than the last. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left, I found myself in the kitchen, sitting at the same wooden table where my mother used to drink her tea. The chair across from me was empty, and I stared at it, half expecting her to appear, to scold us for fighting, to bring peace like she always did. But there was only the creak of the floorboards and the faint murmur of Daniel's voice in the next room. I heard him laugh again, louder this time, unbothered by grief. Then his voice dropped low, sharp, like a knife slicing through the air. "This house, it's going to be mine," he said to one of our uncles. I froze. My heart skipped. Did he really just say that? Uncle Thomas coughed awkwardly. "Daniel, the will hasn't been read yet. Don't rush." Daniel chuckled. "I don't need to wait. She told me everything. My sister can keep some photos, maybe a piece of furniture, but the house, this house, is mine." His confidence burned through me like fire. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. How could he speak so openly, so arrogantly, when our mother's memory was still fresh in this house? I wanted to storm into the living room and confront him, but something inside told me to wait, to listen, to collect every word he said. Because deep down, I knew Daniel was playing a game, the kind he always played, smiling to the world while twisting the truth behind closed doors. That night, I walked through the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the old wooden floor. I stopped at my mother's bedroom door, slightly open. The scent of her perfume lingered inside. I stepped in, my eyes landing on the small desk where she kept her letters and papers. For a moment, I imagined her sitting there, writing, her pen scratching softly across the page. I whispered into the empty room, "You wouldn't leave me with nothing, would you?" Silence answered back, heavy, suffocating silence. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Daniel in the hallway mirror, standing behind me with that same smug smile. "Don't worry," he said casually. "Mother trusted me to handle everything. You'll get something small, I'm sure." He walked away before I could reply, his footsteps echoing like a countdown. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just grief anymore. This was a battle waiting to happen, and Daniel had already declared himself the winner. But the story had only just begun. The morning after the gathering, I woke up to the sound of drawers slamming. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but then Daniel's voice carried down the hallway, sharp and commanding. When I stepped into the living room, my heart dropped. He was already moving things around like the house belonged to him. The family portraits that once hung neatly on the wall were stacked carelessly on the floor. A cabinet door stood wide open, paper spilling out. "Daniel," I said, my voice still raspy from sleep, "what are you doing?" He barely looked at me. "Organizing. Someone has to take control now." Mother would have wanted things in order. In order? I stepped closer, my chest tight. "This isn't your house to command." He finally turned, and the look in his eyes made my stomach twist. Calm, cold, confident. "It will be," he said simply, like it was an undeniable truth. I watched as he walked over to our mother's favorite chair, a faded armchair by the window, and tapped it lightly. "This one stays. The rest," he waved his hand across the room, as if sweeping everything into the trash, "we'll see what's worth keeping." Anger rose in me like a tide. "You don't get to decide that." Daniel smirked. "Of course I do. You'll understand soon." He moved to the dining table next, running his hand across the polished surface where countless family dinners had been held. "I'll keep this too. It's part of the house. You can take something smaller. Maybe the clock in the hallway. You always liked that old thing." My fists clenched. It wasn't about furniture or clocks or even the table. It was about the way he claimed ownership of everything before the will had even been read. It was about how he erased me from the picture with a single smirk. Later that afternoon, a neighbor came by with food. She glanced at the boxes Daniel had stacked in the hallway and frowned. "Are you moving already?" she asked. Daniel smiled warmly. "Yes, just preparing. The house needs a new caretaker." Her eyes softened. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you were the responsible one." The words cut into me like glass. I wanted to scream, "She said that to me, too." But instead, I stood frozen, watching as Daniel soaked in the praise, pretending to carry a weight he never bore. When the neighbor left, I confronted him. "You're making it look like I don't even exist, like she never had 2 children." He shrugged. "That's because she trusted me more. It's not my fault you were less involved." "Less involved?" My voice cracked. "I was the one who stayed when she was sick. I cooked, I cleaned, I handled her medicine when you were too busy. Don't you dare erase me from this house." For the first time, his smile faded, but only for a moment. "Doesn't matter. The will decides, and you'll see soon enough who Mother really believed in." He walked past me, carrying a box towards the study. His shoulder brushed mine, deliberately forceful, as if to push me aside. I followed him. "Daniel, this isn't over. You can play king all you want, but the truth will come out." He stopped at the doorway and turned, his grin returning. "The truth already has. You're just too blind to see it." That night, I wandered through the house, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Every corner held memories of my mother, but Daniel's presence tainted them. Her laughter in the kitchen, her voice in the garden, even the way she tucked me in when I was small.
He had turned all of it into a possession to claim. I stood by the window, staring at the dark silhouette of the house across the street, and whispered to myself, she wouldn't leave me with nothing. She couldn't. But doubt crawled in like a shadow. What if she had? What if Daniel was right? I shook the thought away, gripping the windowsill until my knuckles turned white. No. Something inside me told me this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a fight I couldn't afford to lose.
The days after Daniel's takeover felt like walking on broken glass. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of drawers slamming, boxes shifting, and Daniel humming as if he were preparing his new home. I stayed quiet, counting down the hours, waiting for some sign that this nightmare would end. Then, one morning, it came. The mail slot clicked, and a single envelope slid across the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and my heart skipped. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, the kind used for formal matters. On the front, in bold black letters, "From the office of Mr. Collins, attorney at law." I froze. This was it. The will. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a neatly folded letter. The official reading of the last will and testament of Mrs. Margaret Evans will take place this Friday at 2 p.m. in my office. Attendance of all beneficiaries is required. The words blurred for a moment. My breath came shallow. This was what I had been waiting for. The truth was finally coming. But Daniel's footsteps echoed down the hallway before I could hide the letter. He appeared in the doorway, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking smug as always. "What's that?" I folded the paper quickly. "It's from Mr. Collins." His smile widened. "Ah, so the moment has come." He stepped closer, his voice dripping with confidence. "Don't get your hopes up, little sister. Mother already promised me everything." "Promised you?" I shot back. "You mean manipulated. You've been whispering in her ear for years, twisting her words until she believed only you." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask slipped. "Call it what you want. In the end, she signed the papers. That's all that matters." I wanted to slap the smirk off his face, but instead I shoved the letter against his chest. "Friday, 2 o'clock. We'll see what matters then." He glanced at the letter, then handed it back with a lazy grin. "Don't embarrass yourself. Accept what's coming." When he left, the walls seemed to close in on me. I sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the letter so tightly it crumpled in my hand. The room felt colder, as if my mother's presence had been sucked away and replaced with Daniel's arrogance. All day, I couldn't shake the thought of what Friday would bring. My mother had always told me she wanted fairness. She said she wanted both of us to share, to protect the house together. I replayed her words in my head like a broken record. "No matter what happens, promise me you'll both take care of it." But Daniel's confidence, it was too strong, too certain. That night, I called Aunt Helen, my mother's sister. "The will is being read on Friday," I told her. There was a long pause on the line. Then she sighed. "I know what Margaret wanted. She always spoke about you, about how much you sacrificed for her. Don't let Daniel convince you otherwise." Her words were a small comfort, but doubt still gnawed at me. Daniel had resources, charm, and influence. I had only my memories and my mother's promises. Friday couldn't come soon enough. When the day finally arrived, the sky was gray, heavy with clouds, as if the weather itself knew what was coming. I dressed simply, my hands shaking as I buttoned my shirt. Daniel, of course, strutted out of his room in a tailored suit, adjusting his tie like he was about to close $1 million deal. In the car ride, the silence between us was unbearable. Daniel tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, humming a tune while I stared out the window, my stomach churning. "You're awfully quiet," he finally said, glancing at me with a grin. "Some of us respect the gravity of this moment," I replied coldly.
he chuckled. And some of us already know the outcome. When we arrived at Mr. Collins's office, my legs felt heavy. The building was old, but imposing, with tall windows and a brass plaque by the door. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of leather and old books. I sat stiffly in a chair, clutching my bag, while Daniel leaned back, flipping through a magazine as if he didn't have a care in the world. Finally, Mr. Collins opened the door to his office. His eyes were kind, but there was something in them, something unreal, that made my pulse race. "Come in," he said, gesturing for us to follow. The time had come.
Mr. Collins' office felt like a museum of old decisions. Heavy books lined the walls in neat rows, their spines cracked with age. A brass clock ticked with crisp certainty on the shelf behind him. The window let in a pale, gray light that flattened every color in the room. Daniel took the chair to my right as if it were reserved for him, crossing his legs, polished shoe bouncing once against the air. I sat upright, both hands clasped in my lap, willing my heartbeat to slow. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Collins said, voice measured, professional. He adjusted his glasses, opened a brown leather folder, and placed a fountain pen parallel to the papers inside. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic. The pen rolled half an inch, he stopped it with a finger, and looked at us both. "As you know, we are here to read the last will and testament of your mother, Ms. Margaret Evans." Daniel cleared his throat, a subtle performance to center the stage on himself. "We're ready," he said, the corners of his mouth already lifting. Mr. Collins nodded once. He slid a single document to the top of the stack and smoothed it with his palm. The paper made a soft sound, like a sigh. "This document was executed 6 months ago, in my presence, with a witness from my office. I will read the relevant provisions in full." His eyes lowered. "To my son, Daniel Evans, I bequeath the entirety of my estate, my primary residence, adjacent land, all accounts and holdings, and all personal effects not otherwise designated in a memorandum." The words hit the room like a dropped stone. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the hallway a phone rang and stopped. Daniel exhaled through his nose, a smile blooming, slow, and expensive. I swallowed hard and tried to keep my voice steady. Is that all?" Mr. Collins continued, reading the boilerplate: debts to be settled, taxes as applicable, the appointment of an executor. It was all procedural, bloodless. "I appoint my son Daniel Evans as executor of my estate." He paused to turn the page. There wasn't another page. He only flattened the single sheet again. "That is the substance of the will." "I knew it," Daniel murmured, loud enough for both of us to hear. He turned his head, not fully, just enough to let me see the victorious light in his eyes. "Mother wanted order." I felt my face grow hot. "Order?" The words scraped on the way out. "She told me she wanted fairness. She said we would share." "People say a lot of things in passing. What matters is what's on paper." Mr. Collins rested his fingertips on the document, shoulders subtly tight. "The law recognizes the signed, witnessed instrument," he said. His tone was neutral, but his gaze slid to me for a breath longer than necessary, as if to say something he was not saying. "If there are concerns about capacity or undue influence, there are channels to—" Daniel straightened, the picture of offended dignity. "Are we implying something here? This is ridiculous. Mother was perfectly lucid." "I am only stating procedure," Mr. Collins said. He capped the pen, then uncapped it again, a tiny rhythm. Click, stillness, click. "Do you have any questions at this time?" A dozen of them crowded my throat, none complete. Why 6 months ago? Why not earlier? Why did she never tell me? Why does this feel like a script Daniel rehearsed? Did my mother leave any letter?
any memorandum, anything in her handwriting. I heard the tremor in my voice and hated it. Mr. Collins' eyes softened for a fraction of a second. No memorandum was filed with this will. He looked down, too quickly, too deliberately, then back up. Nothing attached. Daniel spread his arms, magnanimous. Look, I'm not heartless. You can take a few keepsakes. The hallway clock you like, maybe one of the smaller paintings. I'll even have the movers bring them to you, properly packed. The word movers turned my stomach. You're already arranging movers? Efficiency. It's what Mother valued. The clock on the shelf clicked past another minute. In that tiny sound, I heard something stubborn, steady, not bending to anyone's certainty. I focused on it to keep from shaking. Mr. Collins, I said, more evenly now, you've known our family for years. Did my mother ever express worry, pressure, anything that suggested she changed her mind under stress? He held my gaze. The air thinned. Your mother was a private woman, he said carefully. She did, however, express concern about... He stopped himself, rethreaded the sentence. She expressed concern about avoiding conflict. Daniel laughed once. Huh, successful then. The laugh shattered something in me. Stop pretending you care about peace. You care about control. He leaned closer, voice velvet over steel. Control makes peace possible, and it will be peaceful when you accept reality. Mr. Collins cleared his throat, a gentle wedge between us. There are copies of the will for your records. Should either party wish to discuss administrative steps, we can schedule a follow-up. Daniel reached out and took both copies, then handed one to me as if bestowing a favor. His cufflink flashed under the gray light. I'll be in touch about the house, he told Mr. Collins, then added to me, almost kindly, you don't have to make this hard. I stood, the chair legs whispering against the rug. I'm not making it hard. I'm refusing to make it easy. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence returned, not the crushing kind from the day my mother died, but a thinner, more dangerous one, a drawn bowstring. Mr. Collins folded the leather folder closed. The click of the clasp sounded final. As we turned to leave, Mr. Collins said my name, softly. When I glanced back, his expression was composed, but there was a current beneath it. If you have questions after you've reviewed the documents, feel free to stop by. Sometimes clarity arrives after the first reading. Clarity, Daniel echoed behind me, amused. How poetic. In the corridor, the carpet swallowed our footsteps. Daniel walked a step ahead, already pulling out his phone, already making plans. I slowed, just enough to glance through the glass at Mr. Collins. He stood at his desk, unmoving, eyes on the door we had just closed. Then, barely, he nodded to himself, as though acknowledging a thought he hadn't spoken. Outside, the sky was still gray. A breeze lifted the edge of my jacket, cool and sober. Daniel unlocked the car with a chirp and slid in without waiting. I stayed on the curb a second longer, the copy of the will whispering against my palm. The words on the page were blunt, absolute. But the way Mr. Collins had watched me, the hesitation under his careful language, it all said something else. Facts can be inked. Truth sometimes needs a second reading.
The moment we stepped outside Mr. Collins' office, the world seemed quieter, as if it had been muted on purpose. The streets were busy, cars rolled past, people hurried with umbrellas under the heavy sky. But to me, everything sounded muffled, like my ears were stuffed with cotton. All I could hear, clear as a bell, were Mr. Collins' words echoing in my skull. To my son, Daniel Evans, I bequeath the entirety of my estate. Those 12 words cut deeper than any knife. Daniel strutted down the steps ahead of me, shoulders squared, coat swaying with every confident step.
I gripped the copy of the will in my hands so tightly that the paper wrinkled and bent. My stomach twisted with nausea. How could she? How could my own mother erase me from her life with a single signature? Daniel glanced over his shoulder, his smirk widening when he saw my expression. "You look pale," he said, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "Don't tell me you're surprised." I clenched my jaw. "She promised us both, Daniel. She said we'd share it. She looked me in the eye and said those words." He stopped walking, turned fully, and studied me like a cat watching a mouse. "People promise things to make you feel better. What matters is what they sign. And she signed everything to me." "Or maybe you pushed her into it," I snapped. The words escaped before I could stop them. Daniel's smile flickered, then returned sharper than before. "Careful. Accusations can be dangerous. What are you going to say? That I forced her? That I manipulated our sweet old mother?" He leaned closer, his breath warm with arrogance. "No one would believe you. Everyone saw me by her side. Everyone knows I was the devoted son. You were the shadow." The rage that burned in my chest nearly blinded me. My voice cracked under the weight of it. "That's not true. I was the one cooking, cleaning, helping her walk when she could barely stand. You only showed up when it made you look good." He chuckled, the sound so cold it made my skin crawl. "Perception is reality, sister. And right now, the reality is this: the house, the land, the money. It's mine. All of it." I shook my head, disbelief swirling with grief. "She wouldn't have done this. Not willingly. She wasn't blind to who you are." He shrugged, stepping past me towards the car. "Believe whatever fantasy makes you sleep at night. But don't fight me on this. You'll lose. And it'll be embarrassing." I stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain beginning to drizzle on my shoulders, watching him slide behind the wheel with all the ease of a man who thought the world bent to him. My chest ached. I wanted to scream at him, to tear the smug expression from his face, but the weight of the will in my hands pinned me down like iron shackles. The drive back was unbearable. Daniel hummed to himself, tapping on the steering wheel, glancing at me occasionally with that same look of superiority. My knuckles were white around the crumpled papers on my lap. Every street we passed looked unfamiliar, even though it was the same town I had lived in my entire life. Everything felt stolen. When we arrived at the house, he walked straight in, dropped his coat on the sofa, and poured himself a drink as if he had already moved in permanently. I stayed in the hallway, soaked in rain, unable to take a step further. Finally, I whispered, almost to myself, "This isn't right." Daniel raised his glass in mock salute. "What isn't right is pretending you were ever meant to have half. Mother knew better. She chose the child who could carry her legacy, not the one who hid in her shadow." The bitter words stung, but more than that, they planted a seed of doubt. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if she was right. Maybe she had chosen him. Maybe I wasn't enough. But then, in the quiet of the night, as I lay in my old room staring at the ceiling, fragments of my mother's voice replayed in my head. "Don't let anyone take this house from you. Promise me you'll protect it." My breath shook. She did say that. She told me. She trusted me. I sat up, my fists curling around the sheets. No, this wasn't the end. The will Daniel waved like a crown might say the estate was his, but there was something deeper, something Mr. Collins hadn't said. I had seen it in his eyes. in the way his words faltered, in the way his hand trembled when he closed the folder. This was a bitter blow, yes, but it wasn't final. Daniel thought he had already won. He was wrong.
The night after the will reading stretched on like an endless hallway. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, the sound of Daniel's footsteps echoing faintly through the house. He was pacing, like a king surveying his new kingdom. Every creak of the floorboards above me stabbed at my nerves. Sleep never came. By morning, my eyes were bloodshot, my head heavy, but Daniel was chipper, humming as he brewed coffee in the kitchen. "Long night?" he asked, smirking as he poured himself a steaming cup. He didn't bother offering me one. I ignored him and sat silently at the table. The will, folded and refolded until the creases nearly tore, lay in front of me. I couldn't stop looking at my mother's name at the top, bold and final. It was like she was alive in that one line, only to vanish completely in the next. Her last words leaving me nothing. Daniel leaned back, sipping loudly. "Still hoping it's all a mistake?" "I don't believe she would have done this," I said firmly. "Not without reason. Not willingly." He chuckled. "People don't always match the fairy tale you build in your head. Accept it." But even as he gloated, something gnawed at me. The way Mr. Collins had looked at me, the way his words faltered before he snapped back into professional tone, it hadn't been nothing. That afternoon, I found myself walking back toward Mr. Collins' office, my heart pounding harder with every step. I didn't even know what I would say. What if I was wrong? What if I was just grasping at straws, chasing shadows out of desperation? Still, I had to try. His office smelled the same: leather, dust, and the faint tang of ink. The secretary glanced up, surprised to see me. "Oh, hello. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said quickly. "But it's important, please." She hesitated, then stood and walked into the back. Moments later, Mr. Collins appeared in the doorway. His suit was immaculate, his tie straight, but his eyes carried that same heaviness I had seen before. "Come in," he said quietly. I sat across from him at the broad oak desk. The will folder was gone, but the empty space where it had rested yesterday felt like a ghost on the polished wood. "I'm not here to fight," I began, my voice shaking. I need to know, was that really everything? Did my mother leave nothing else?" His lips pressed into a thin line. He removed his glasses, polished them with a cloth, and set them back on carefully. The silence stretched until I thought I would scream. Finally, he spoke, each word deliberate. "Your mother was complicated near the end. She worried about many things." My pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" "About conflict. About her children not being able to live in peace." He looked down at his hands, folded tightly. "She wanted to prevent further damage." "Then why would she give everything to Daniel?" My voice cracked, the question ripping through me. "Why erase me?" His eyes lifted, and for the briefest moment, pity shone through. "The documents I read were the official filed instruments, but—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "Let's just say, sometimes there is more to a person's wishes than one document can show." My breath caught. My hands gripped the arms of the chair. "What are you saying? Did she leave something else?" He hesitated again, then leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped. "Not here. Not now. Come back tomorrow. Alone." The air in the office thickened. My chest tightened as if invisible hands were pressing against it. "Why tomorrow?" "Because," he said, sliding a pen across the desk to occupy his restless fingers, "because if there is something, it must be handled carefully. Your brother must not know." I swallowed hard. "So there is something." He didn't answer. Instead, he slipped his glasses back on and stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Tomorrow, noon. And do not mention this to Daniel."
I rose slowly, my legs weak beneath me. As I walked out of the office, I could feel his gaze following me, heavy and conflicted. Outside, the gray clouds still lingered, pressing low against the rooftops. The streets buzzed with ordinary life, cars, children, strangers going about their day. But inside me, the world had shifted. For the first time since my mother's death, a spark of hope lit in my chest. There was more. Something Daniel didn't know.
The next morning felt heavier than any before. I woke up before sunrise, the sky still painted in dark blue, restless and wide-eyed. Daniel's door was shut down the hall, but I could hear faint snoring. For once, he was sleeping soundly, convinced he had already won. I tiptoed past his room, clutching my coat, the copy of the will still folded in my pocket. It felt like a dead weight. But today there might be something to balance it. The walk to Mr. Collins' office was long and gray. Every step sounded louder than it should have. Every face on the street looked suspicious, like they somehow knew the secret I carried. By the time I reached the old brick building, my pulse was hammering in my throat. The secretary glanced up when I entered. She opened her mouth to ask, but Mr. Collins himself appeared in the doorway. "Come in," he said firmly, before she could speak. His office was the same, books, dust, and silence, but the air felt charged. He shut the door behind us and turned the key. That small click echoed louder than thunder. I sat down, nerves buzzing through my veins. "You said there was more. Please, just tell me the truth." Mr. Collins hesitated, his hands resting on the edge of his desk. He looked older than yesterday, the weight of something unspoken hanging on his shoulders. Finally, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small, sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. My breath caught the instant I saw the handwriting. It was hers, my mother's. My hands shook as he slid it across the desk. "She gave this to me," he said quietly. "Told me to keep it safe and only to hand it over if I believed it was necessary." I stared at it, afraid to touch it, as if the envelope itself burned. "Why didn't you give it to me yesterday?" "Because yesterday everything was chaos. Your brother was there. I needed to be certain you were ready for what's inside." With trembling fingers, I picked it up. The envelope was light, but it carried a weight greater than stone. I ripped it open carefully, almost reverently. Inside, there was a folded sheet of paper and a second, smaller envelope tucked behind it. The letter came first. My eyes blurred before I even began reading, but I forced myself through the tears. "My dearest child, if you are reading this, it means I was too weak to stand up against Daniel's pressure. He came to me when I was ill, when I was vulnerable, and he convinced me that signing the papers would avoid conflict. I did it out of fear, not out of love. But please believe me, I never forgot you, and I never intended to leave you with nothing." I couldn't talk as I continued. "Enclosed, you will find my true last will, written in my own hand and signed before witnesses I trust. This reflects what I truly want, for you to have the house, the land, and the right to protect our family's history. Daniel has his strength in appearances, but you have my heart and my trust. Do not let him take everything from you. This house belongs to you. Protect it." Tears spilled down my cheeks, dotting the paper. For weeks I had doubted her, questioned whether she had chosen Daniel willingly. And now I knew the truth. She hadn't abandoned me. She had seen through him all along. I looked up at Mr. Collins, clutching the letter with trembling hands. This changes everything." He nodded solemnly. "It does, but it must be handled carefully. If Daniel learns about this before it's properly filed, he'll fight harder than ever. He'll accuse you of forgery, manipulation, anything to keep control." I swallowed hard, tucking the letter close to my chest. "Then we won't tell him. Not yet." Mr. Collins slid the smaller envelope toward me. "This is the handwritten will. Keep it safe. Tomorrow we'll begin the process to validate it legally. But for now, it's between us."
I picked it up, my entire body trembling. The seal was unbroken, my mother's signature across the back. For a moment, I pressed it against my chest, as if it were her hand reaching for me one last time. For the first time since she passed, I felt her presence. Not in the faded scent of her clothes, not in the echo of her voice, but here, tangible, guiding me. Daniel thought the game was over. He was wrong.
I didn't open the second envelope until I was alone in my room that night. All day I had carried it, pressed against my chest, hidden inside my coat as though it were a fragile flame that might blow out at any moment. Daniel strutted around the house as usual, rearranging furniture, making phone calls, talking about renovations as if he were already the official owner. He had no idea that in my pocket I carried the very thing that could undo him. When I finally shut the door, locking it, I sat at my desk. My hands trembled as I broke the seal on the smaller envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined, slightly creased, written entirely in my mother's handwriting. The ink was faint in some places, darker in others, but there was no mistaking it. This was hers. Every loop, every careful stroke carried her voice louder than anything she could have spoken. I unfolded it and began to read. To my beloved child, if this reaches you, then I was not strong enough to fight Daniel's pressure. I know he used my weakness against me, speaking of peace and order, but what he wanted was control. Please forgive me for allowing him to twist my judgment in those final months. I was scared and tired, and sometimes fear makes us agree to things we never truly want. My eyes blurred, but I forced myself to keep reading, clutching the page tightly. This will is my true wish. The house, the land, and the savings are to go to you because I know you will protect what our family built. Daniel may charm the world, but I trust you to carry my legacy with honesty. I hope this gives you strength. Remember, justice comes quietly sometimes, but it always comes. Protect yourself, protect the truth, and never doubt that I loved you equally, if not more, for the sacrifices you made. At the bottom, her signature stood strong and clear, dated and witnessed by two names I recognized. Neighbors who had been lifelong friends of our family. The sight of their signatures struck me like lightning. This wasn't just a desperate note scribbled in fear. This was official. This was real. I pressed the paper against my chest, tears dripping silently. For the first time since her death, I felt her presence filling the room. The weight of betrayal that had been crushing me since the will reading lifted slightly, replaced with something sharper, something stronger. Resolve. Daniel had gloated too soon. I imagined his face when he saw this document, when his smirk collapsed, when his certainty shattered. But Mr. Collins's warning echoed in my ears. If Daniel learns about this too soon, he'll fight harder than ever. I had to be careful. There was a knock at my door. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. Hastily, I folded the paper and slid it back into the envelope, tucking it beneath the fluce floorboard under my desk. I wiped my eyes just as the door creaked open. Daniel leaned against the frame, his silhouette smug even in the dim light. "Talking to yourself again?" he asked, his grin sharp. "No," I said quickly. "Just reading." He stepped in, eyes scanning the desk as though he were searching for something. My stomach knotted. For a second, I thought he could hear the frantic pounding of my heart. "Strange. You've been acting different since yesterday. Quieter. Almost like you're hiding something." "I'm not," I said firmly, forcing my gaze to meet his. "I'm just tired." He studied me a moment longer, then smiled thinly. "Well, rest up. Big changes are coming. You'll want your strength when we move everything out." When he finally closed the door, I released a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. My hands were damp with sweat. He was suspicious. I had to stay cautious. I sat back at the desk, staring at the floorboard that now hid the envelope. My mother's words replayed in my mind. Protect yourself, protect the truth. I whispered into the silence. I will. I promise. That night, as rain tapped against the window, I lay awake with a new kind of fire burning inside me. Grief was still there, heavy and raw, but it was no longer paralyzing, Now it was fuel. Daniel thought he had buried me under the weight of the official will. He thought he had already won, but the truth was written, signed, and sealed in my mother's own hand. And truth, once revealed, is stronger than any lie.
The days after discovering the hidden will were unbearable. I carried the secret like a live coal in my chest, burning me every time Daniel strutted through the house like a king. He was already making calls to real estate agents, talking about future plans, and even had a contractor visit, measuring the walls like he had the right. Each time he smirked at me, I wanted to pull the envelope from the floorboard and slam it into his face. But Mr. Collins' words echoed in my mind. Be careful. He will fight harder than ever if he knows too soon. Still, there comes a point where silence feels like suffocation. That point arrived one rainy evening when Daniel announced he had scheduled movers for the weekend. They'll pack up the things you don't need, he said casually, sipping whiskey by the fireplace. Don't worry, I'll let you keep a box or two. The inferno roared inside me. I stood, fists shaking. You won't move a single thing out of this house. He arched a brow, amused. And who's going to stop me? You? I walked to my room without answering, ripped the envelope from beneath the floorboard, and stormed back into the living room. My hands shook, but my voice was steady when I threw the document onto the table in front of him. She stopped you. Mother stopped you. Read it. Daniel frowned, picking it up with suspicion. The moment his eyes scanned the handwriting, his face drained of color. He read faster and faster, his breathing shallow. Then he slammed the paper down. This is fake. He spat, his voice cracking. It's real, I shot back. Witnessed, signed, dated. This is her true will, not the twisted one you pressured her into signing. His face reddened, rage boiling beneath his skin. You forged this. You're desperate, trying to steal what's mine. Mr. Collins has already confirmed it, I lied smoothly, even though Collins hadn't filed it yet. He knew she left this. He knew she regretted what you made her do. Daniel's chair screeched against the floor as he stood, towering over me. His fists clenched at his sides, trembling. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he leaned down, his voice low and venomous. You think this changes anything? I've built my reputation for years. Nobody will believe you over me. But his eyes betrayed him. They were wide, panicked, filled with something I had never seen in him before. Fear. I straightened my back, meeting his gaze without flinching. The truth doesn't care who people believe. It's written, it's signed, it's hers, and it's stronger than you. He grabbed the document again, nearly crumpling it in his hands, but stopped himself. He knew destroying it wouldn't make it vanish. It would only make him look guilty. His hands shook as he threw it back on the table. This isn't over, he growled, not by a long shot. No, I said, my voice firm, unshaken. It's just beginning. For the first time, Daniel didn't smile.
The weeks that followed were a blur of hearings, signatures, and long meetings at Mr. Collins' office. Daniel fought, of course. He hired a lawyer, tried to question the authenticity of the hidden will, and even accused me of tampering. But the witnesses confirmed everything. The handwriting was verified. Every detail was airtight. The truth had a way of cutting through his lies, slow but merciless. I'll never forget the day the court declared my mother's handwritten will valid. The judge's gavel struck, and with that single sound, Daniel's empire of arrogance crumbled. He stood there, jaw tight, eyes burning into me, but powerless. For once, he had nothing left to say. When I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter. The weight that had crushed me since my mother's death finally lifted. The house, the land, the memories, they were safe. Not because I fought with fists, but because I fought with truth. Back at the house, I stood on the porch at sunset, the same porch where Daniel once told me to accept reality. Now the reality was his to swallow. He had lost, not just the estate, but the mask he wore so proudly. Everyone saw him for what he truly was, a manipulator who tried to steal what wasn't his. I looked out at the fields my mother loved, the roses in the garden beginning to bloom again. Her words whispered in my memory, "Promise me you'll perfect the house." I kept my promise, I whispered into the evening air. Daniel never came back after that. Perhaps he was too ashamed, or maybe too angry, but it didn't matter. The house was mine. The truth was mine. My mother's legacy was safe. Revenge hadn't come through anger or violence or even shouting. It had come quietly, through patience, through paper and ink, through her faith in me. Justice had struck like iron, steady and unbreakable. And in that silence, at last, I felt peace.